Good evening all and welcome. Cryptids, unknown horrors are waiting for us in tonight's video. So join me as we delve into a world of unknown monsters seen by few. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I consider myself to be a rather skeptical person and have written off most of cryptozoology and paranormal stuff as straight bunk up until the following event. It was the late summer of 2005 in Northeast Ohio. I was heading into my junior year of high school and was spending the night over at my best friend's house. And we decided for the hell of it to crash outside for the night with just sleeping bags. It was a peaceful enough night. The weather was nice, balmy warmth. The air rang with the pleasant symphonies of crickets and far-off spring peepers. The skies couldn't have been more clear, as it was that special sort of feeling in the air where you were far enough away from the last time it rained that it didn't feel heavy anymore and actually felt inviting, as opposed to humid and miserable. This was as close to picturesque as summers could get. Everything was blanketed in the dark blue elegance of the evening light. Falling asleep was easy enough. This was a year that mosquitoes were remarkably in pretty low numbers, making sleeping unprotected with just a sleeping bag very simple. Eventually, as bad luck would have it, I had to answer my call to nature, so I roused from my sleep to do so. My buddy's yard was a fairly large-sized one, with an area of woods bordering most of it. After finishing, I staggered back over to my sleeping bag and noticed my friend was not in his. We were staged a few feet apart in case a bear came and got someone in the middle of the night or something. It would leave enough time for the other one to run to safety. You know, bro stuff. In any case, I catch him in my peripheral vision, just kind of standing along the side of a shed that was in his yard. I wasn't kidding when I said this night was picturesque. The sky was so unnaturally clear that the starlight and what little of the crescent moon we had left led to quite a bit of light despite being in the dead of night. However, the area we chose to pee, with the shed, included to be nestled along the part of the yard with the thickest trees, leading to a large portion of the yard still being under heavy shadow. Kind of funny when you think about it, having a well-defined area of shade in the dead of night when you're expecting everything to be dark. Oh, have I mentioned that at this point, everything was also suspiciously quiet? The idyllic chirping of the frogs and crickets that have earlier ushered me to sleep was now nowhere to be heard. I hadn't realized it when I first woke up to do my business, but it was quiet the whole time since I woke. Honestly, the fact that it was so quiet may have been why I woke up in the first place, on top of answering nature's call. Focusing my attention back on my friend, I noticed that he was still standing by the shed. He was around the corner away from me, so I had to approach him from behind, and thankfully it seemed as if he was done doing his business as his pants were up. "Hey, what are you just doing standing around here?" I ask, as I circle around behind him and approach to his left. I didn't even need to wait for an answer before I immediately saw what had him frozen. Roughly 30 feet away, hidden among the thicker area of the forest in the yard, way back behind the shed, it stood. I'm not the greatest with words, so please bear with me. I will try to describe as best as I can what befell my eyes. This creature was perhaps a few inches taller than myself and stood at least 6 foot. However, that's where the similarities end. It stood on 2 legs with a hunched posture, as it appeared to have had its shoulders raised up, with its head leaning slightly forward. It had arms, but the forearms were a bit longer than the upper arms, culminating into a sickly-looking hand with long points almost like claws. Though bathed in starlight and shadow, I could discern the skin of the beast was a dark, greyish colour. The head itself was mostly obscured by shadow, but retained a general humanoid appearance. I could not make out a mouth or jaw though. However, one unnerving thing about the head was that its eyes glowed red. While perhaps glow was a bit of a sensationalization, it actually looked more like the red-eye effect from old photos, but it definitely illuminated the immediate area around the eye socket, so perhaps illuminate is the better term. This creature was so sickeningly frail and thin that there was no way that it was just a neighbor messing with us, as it didn't seem physically possible for something so thin to even be able to support weight on such a frame. And then it started moving. At this point, my fight or flight response told me to get the hell out of there, but I stood frozen in fear. The beast, already a horrific bastardization of the human form, now grotesquely bobbed its body up and down as if attempting to take off in flight. I didn't notice it before, but there appeared to be a sort of cape behind its back. I say cape, but it appeared to be ragged, a fleshy texture, as if the skin on its back was flayed off and it was dragging behind its arms. This sickening flesh cape waved with each flap of its arms, giving the illusion of wings. But that wasn't even the worst part. It emitted a noise, not a growl, nor roar, nor scream. The sound it made was akin to a raspy inhale, like someone deeply out of breath. However, this wasn't like that. There was a sort of reverb to this breathing. It echoed quietly, yet still managed to be one of those sounds that you feel in your bones. Each graveling breath raking its claws into your very soul as you are already frozen in fear. This dance felt like it went on for hours, but in reality, only a few brief moments passed. Our bodies finally made enough adrenaline that we were able to finally bolt and sprint to his house. We spoke about it for the next few days following, but after a point, we just didn't feel like reliving it anymore until we researched what cryptids were and settled on the idea we came across one and decided people would think we were full of it and opted to not keep talking about it anymore. To this day, I still don't know what I encountered, but this experience has subconsciously kept me terrified of being in wooded areas after dark for all these years. In fact, last weekend my wife and kids and I went camping at a state campground, and it was the first time I had been outside at night in the woods since that day, and I was terrified all night. Thankfully nothing happened, and we had a nice weekend, but it's crazy that this experience affected me for so many years. My wife was the only other person I shared this experience with, and at first she laughed it off, thinking I was kidding, until she saw how solemn I got when I spoke about it, and that it wasn't a joke to me. She then confided in me that she too had experienced something paranormal, so that's fun too. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. Hopefully I was able to convey it properly. Superficially, I would say it resembled what people have described what the Mothman looked like, but I never saw it take flight, and the eyes didn't glow nearly as bright as reports made it out to. The wings only looked like wings when it was flapping its arms, and I doubt it could have actually flown with that raggedy skin flap. But I'm not going to stay and figure it out. Others say that it was some kind of crawler, but I suppose I'll never know. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am a 20-year-old guy from Germany, but at the time of this event, I was 17. My father and I are both fishermen, and I have pretty much fished my entire life. My father lives in a pretty small town, so every time I was there, we would always be out in nature, either fishing or doing something else. There was a private property about 6 miles away from my father's house, and since it had lakes on it, my father one day went and bought it. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it was. Of course, for 9-year-old me, it was paradise to have lakes that nobody else fished in. Fast forward a few years, and we'd made this property our second home. We set up targets for us so that we can shoot them with bows, and both my father and I had become pretty good shots, and had compound bows. We also had built little huts out of logs and other materials that we found on the property, and if this wasn't paradise for me before, it surely was now. Over the years, we had a few problems with trespassers, most of them people who were just there to collect mushrooms or berries, but never had any problems with that. There were also a few people with somewhat sinister intentions. We were out on the property for my 2-week vacation. This was the morning of the 3rd day. I slept in my hut. I got up about 9 in the morning, and the first thing I did was check my phone. There was a message from my dad saying he would drop off our trailer later, because it was supposed to rain the following night. So I answered him that I would be waiting, and also asked him if he could drop off some extra food, because I was running low on supplies, and he happily agreed. After that, I began making myself my morning coffee and smoked my morning cig. When I finished it, I started fishing. I pretty much fished the whole day up until noon. I remember looking over the little hill on which the road goes through the property all the way to the front gate, and I saw my father's truck making his way down to me with the trailer behind it. So I put my rod down and went to help my father. We unhooked the trailer and pushed it into position. After that, my father just exchanged words real quick on how everything was going, and I told him it was all fine. He gave me the food and water that he had brought for me, and after that he left. This might sound like a toxic relationship, but it's the complete opposite. My father and I both knew he just needed to get home to work for the following day, and we also knew that we could talk on the weekend when he was coming there to stay overnight, so it was fairly normal for us. He left, and I was once again alone. I decided that I was going to make myself some dinner. After that, I fished for a while longer, and decided to do a little check to make sure no one was on the property that wasn't supposed to. I didn't find anyone, but it was around that time that it started, the feeling of being watched. I had had that feeling for a whole walk, and it never left me. I was growing a little paranoid, thinking that there was something out there watching me. Maybe it was just a deer that I somehow failed to notice, even though I looked at the trees for what felt like eternity. So I kept on fishing even though I didn't feel comfortable, and just continued trying to brush it off. As it got darker, it was time for me to hit the hay. I moved my stuff from the hut to the trailer and stored it all in there. Because the feeling of being watched persisted, I decided to put my bow and my knife next to my bed, because I thought I'd rather be safe than sorry. I fell asleep and woke up at 2 a.m. in the morning to the sound of something hitting my trailer. I just lay there, listening. It sounded like little rocks hitting the roof. The feeling of being watched intensified now, along with a new feeling, dread, like something bad was imminent. So I had to make a decision. I could stay put or investigate. So I turned on my headlamp and lantern, which I placed just outside my trailer's front door, grabbed my knife, put it back into the holster on my bed, grabbed my bow and my quiver and went outside. I looked around, but couldn't see anything past the tree line. The sound of something hitting the trailer had also stopped. Now I was pissed, because I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but I wanted to make sure that no one was really there. So I decided to make another trip around the property, just to make sure. Bow in hand, I made my way round and found no one. Even more mad because I made my way back to my trailer, and as soon as I saw the front of it, I froze. There was something there. I instantly killed my headlamp so whatever it was wouldn't see me, and I stood there watching. Because of the lantern I left next to the door, I could see the thing pretty well, but it couldn't see me. Or at least it didn't react. It was just standing there, banging onto the side of my trailer. This thing was standing on 2 legs. It was bipedal, and that rules out nearly every other animal we have here. Its body was strangely similar to that of a human, but its skin was way too pale to be that of a human, and his arms were way too long. It stood hunched over, about 7 feet tall, just standing there, looking at it for about 15 minutes. Once I kind of snapped out of the trance, the feeling of dread was replaced with fear. I'd never seen anything quite like it and stayed quiet. I knew I could move unseen right into his 6 o'clock position, so I made my way silently through the underbrush. Once I was behind it, I was only 40 yards away. I took aim with my bow, and even though the fear was pumping through my body, I was still able to hold the bow perfectly, took aim, and fired. The still of the night was replaced with an ungodly shriek that I can only describe as nothing I've ever heard before. I saw that I hit it, but it didn't go down. At that moment it turned to face me. I loaded up another arrow and fired again, and it just started to leap towards me. This thing was fast. I don't think it connected, but I didn't care. I turned and I ran, sprinting through the underbrush, cutting myself everywhere. I stopped once I was out, near a paved road on the edge of the property. I stopped to listen, and noticed there was nothing behind me anymore. I dropped to my knees and began shaking, and was completely terrified. I waited there until the sun came up, and made my way back to the trailer. Once I reached it, I looked for signs that I had just imagined it, because I was in disbelief. But I could see the tracks of where this thing started running after me. Not like distinct footprints, but more like a path of destroyed bush and broken branches. Also, to this day, I haven't found the arrows that I fired that night. So I sat down, bow in hand, until my father arrived to check on me like he did almost every day. When he saw all the cuts on my arms and legs, he asked what happened, but I brushed it off and told him nonchalantly I stumbled into a thorn bush. I've never told him this story. In fact, this is the first time I speak about it. We still go to the property every now and again, but now I always carry a big hunting knife and have my bow with me. I had nightmares about what could have happened for 2 years after that, and to this day I don't know what I saw. I'm pretty sure it wasn't my imagination. I was out hunting at our normal spot. Mind you, this was almost 13 years ago. I'm sitting in my spot, see the deer, nothing worth shooting. I'm enjoying watching the animals. It's getting to the magic hour, about twilight. About 85 yards away is this tree line that bumps against the other property. I've been hunting in these woods for the better part of almost 5 years. That's when I noticed something big and black, moving against the tree line. Its moving was somewhat cumbersome. My first thought was that it was another hunter. I get kind of upset that he decided to mess around at this late in the game, when all of a sudden he takes off sprinting. This creature takes 4 to 5 leaps and has crossed the tree line. Mind you, it's nearly 200 yards long. This creature maybe took 6 to 7 leaps and cleared it in a few seconds. My buddy and I had walkie-talkies to keep each other informed about our location, or if we saw deer moving to each other's location. I immediately tell him something human is moving along the tree line at insane speed. After I talk to him, he confirms it, and we nope the hell out of there. We never saw whatever it was again. About 5 years ago when I was 15, I would frequently walk home from school with a few friends through a wooded area, which was on a steep hill. We had explored the area for a decent amount of time, as we had been walking that way since we were all 13. Next to the forest there was a field with a wire fence round two sides of it, blocking off the forest. The fence had a human-sized hole in it, which we explored a few months before, that led through bushes to what we believed was an abandoned homeless person's camp, complete with a badly built shelter out of a tarp and crates, a few plastic chairs, and a small pit in the middle. We went there a few times to show people, and it always stayed pretty much in the exact same spot, except the chairs would move positions every so often, and sometimes be thrown into the bushes. We went here often but never saw anyone. To get to our houses, we would have to walk from the fields up the steep hill to the forest to get to the top to where the houses are. It was late spring. A few friends and I were walking home after school as normal. It was a pretty nice day, so we thought we'd explore the woods rather than heading straight home. We were exploring for a decent amount of time, maybe an hour or so, just walking through bushes, trying to find other paths or open areas. We walked through a thick bush and discovered we had accidentally walked into the homeless person's camp area. We were all confused, as we'd never gotten to it from this angle, only through the fence. But something felt off, like a kind of sinking feeling. My friends didn't share that feeling. One of them was tired from walking, so decided to sit on one of the plastic chairs and eat some food he'd brought earlier, whilst me and my other friend just walked around the camp seeing if anything had changed. We walked into the covered bit and could smell something pretty grim, but couldn't exactly figure out what it was. One of my friends thought it was a dead body and decided to look further in, while I went back out to speak to the other. I was still pretty freaked out. One of my friends was gone for a few minutes until he called for us to come and see what he found. We refused, so he came out all annoyed and called us names, pulling up his phone to show us pictures of a dead rat. The rat looked rotten and torn apart. He said he found it right at the back in a corner. Either way, we found it creepy and decided to just leave it. I wanted to go through the fence and walk around the forest, but the other two said it would take way too long and that we may just as well walk quickly up the hill through the forest so that they could all get home. I decided to go with them. I didn't really fancy going home alone. We went back the way we came, with that feeling kind of dropping. My friends were just joking around, trying not to think about the rat, when we didn't notice that one of our friends fell behind. As we were walking through, the friend that stayed behind kept saying he saw something, but we kind of just took the piss out of him, saying he was seeing things, but he was certain he saw something and was starting to sound distressed. The friend that was still up with me jokingly shouted something along the lines of, "If you're here to kill us, do it already, my leg hurts." And we had a decent laugh, until my friend, Liam, at the bottom, started having a full-on panic attack and began to cry. We went over to make sure he was alright, and that's when I saw something a few meters away, an all-black figure behind a tree. But it wasn't a person in all black or anything like that. It was dark. I could see its shape, looking like an elongated person shape, with fingers that were long and wide, holding onto the tree. I thought it was a shadow or something, but I could see that it was 3D. I stood staring for a few seconds with it also not moving. I felt like a deer in headlights, until my other friend, Marnie, started shouting on whatever it was. I still didn't move. Marnie dragged us. He was bawling his eyes out. We got far enough away at that point that we just decided to turn around and run. I really couldn't run that much, as I felt as I'd had all the energy drained from me. I turned back around and the thing had barely moved, now leaning more from the tree with its long, thin arms by its side. We kept going. We were quite out of breath but tried to jog. When we got to the road at the top of the hill, we fell to the ground from exhaustion, staring at the forest. I think Marnie started filming the forest, shouting something, but I can't remember what. Nothing really came after us. We went home, making sure to stick to the main roads. Even though we had school the next day, my friends and I decided to stay at my house and talk about what we saw and draw pictures of it. We told my mum and she didn't exactly believe us, but said she would drop us to school and pick us up the next day to make us feel a bit better. We spoke about it with mates, but they just blew us off, as if we were trying to make something up. We looked through the video footage but didn't see anything. We would each claim to see it again, but could not really validate it, as it was never clear as it was the first time, seeing it from car windows when driving near, or whilst walking to the shop by the field after school. To this day, me and my friends have not returned to that forest. I don't think Marnie has gone back to the forest, but I haven't spoken to them for a while since high school. But that long black figure always remains in my mind. It still messes me up whenever I walk home in the dark. I live in a small town called Bundaberg in southeast Queensland, Australia. It's a small farming town on the coast, and the property we're on is surrounded by cane paddocks most of the year, unless they've been harvested, of course, which they are right now. I haven't always lived here. I lived with my mum for all of my life with my other brothers and 2 sisters, but my older brother lived with our grandparents and has been here on the property for about 15 years or so. Of course, I came and went visiting over the years, but I never witnessed this myself. Grandpa is the custodian and prince of the first people of the area, the Daribulum, and this property we're on is sacred and belongs to us through a native title, which Grandpa won many years ago. Grandpa was actually born on the Burnett River that runs through the property down the back. Anyway, as you know, you have the Sasquatch of the Americas, and I assume people have heard of the Yowie, or the Australian version of Bigfoot, also known as Quinkin. But these are the big guys, the giants, colloquially known as hairy men. There are also a different type, which we call Junjurdi, which are the little ones growing no bigger than 5 feet high. There's a story that my older brother used to tell me about how there was a whole group that used to hang out right where I'm sleeping, which is a shed that's been done up about 30 or so meters from the house. But right here used to be a big, bushy, wild orange tree before there were any sheds, and this was a clean-cut yard, completely wide open. You can see me clearly walking up from the shed through the sliding glass door when sitting in the lounge room. When the orange tree was there, apparently they used to hang out some nights, and usually always in the early hours of the morning, even sleep under it, and my brother and Nan and Grandpa said you could clearly see them, either from the lounge room or a bedroom window, but all the bedroom windows were on that one side of the house, and apparently they just completely ignored them until they started messing around with my brother and cousins late at night. Sometimes they would tap and peek through the windows and that. One night my brother is sleeping in his bedroom, and one of our cousins is in there. They were only 13 at the time. They slept with the window open for a breeze. Apparently, our cousins wake up and sees this thing moving around in the room and looks at them, and he just screams and cowers in the corner. My brother wakes up and freaks, screaming for Nan and Grandpa, running straight out the room and down the hallway, and this thing leaps out the window, knocking stuff off the drawers, and runs off into the paddock. The next day, Grandpa went and chopped the orange tree down. Guess he gave him a chance. But once they'd done that, it was time they made themselves scarce. I was about 15 or 16 years old, and walking home from a friend's place at about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with the friend I was living with at the time. My mate was pushing a BMX, and we were just talking and laughing as we walked home. when all of a sudden we saw what looked like two very large greyhounds jump over a set of mailboxes at some flats and landed in the middle of the road. These mailboxes appeared to have been 1.5 meters tall and about 5 to 6 meters from the road. At the moment I thought it was a little strange but kept watching them. What I witnessed was something I will never forget in my life. The two greyhounds, as they ran down the road, appeared to both stand up on their hind legs and morph into a much bigger and much beefier being, which I can only describe as looking like a yowie, which I guess is the equivalent to a Sasquatch to our friends from America and other countries. These yowie both ran around the corner about 200 meters in the direction we came, and we both sat there dumbfounded. A few seconds later, we heard what sounded like a small female child scream in terror, keeping in mind it was around 3 a.m. in the morning, and there were no children out. We both looked at each other in horror, without saying a word, and I jumped on the handlebars on the bike and he pedaled that bike non-stop all the way home about 2 kilometers away. When we got home, we locked the doors, as we had no idea what we just saw, or if they had seen where we went, and after a little while I asked him to describe what he had seen, and I was in disbelief, as he explained the exact same thing I witnessed. That is probably the scariest thing I've ever seen in my life. I've only told a few people about it, and don't think a single person has believed me. They all blame drugs or alcohol. In December of 2011, my husband and I moved to my husband's childhood home in rural southeast Oklahoma. His father died in 2007, and the deed was transferred to my husband's name. The house is located about 175 yards from the community church and its small graveyard. This is a Native American community. It was small and very rural, surrounded by hills and thick woods with intermittent cow pastures, and community that consisted of a huge family network, an extended family, about 5 or 6 generations of them. There are 16 homes with an acre each lot. It's country after all. Before we moved into my husband's home, he told me about some weird paranormal activity he and his family experienced at the same home when he was younger. I've had 1 or 2 experiences prior to moving to Oklahoma, but nothing on this level. Once we moved in, little things would happen every now and then. My story is about a specific experience I had while I was sitting in our living room one evening. I was watching TV with my husband and our 10-month-old daughter in a walker. I had a view of the hallway that leads to our bedrooms and bathroom. My husband walked into the gallery for a drink with our little girl following behind him in her walker. At that very moment, they disappeared behind the kitchen wall. From the corner of my eye, I saw what I interpreted to be our 10-month-old go from one of the bedrooms into the hallway. All I saw was the back of the head of whatever it was. I was confused for a second, so asked my husband if our daughter was with him, just to be sure our daughter was with him in the kitchen, because we always tried to keep her away from the hallway just to be safe. Yeah, why? I got so creeped out, because whatever I had seen was about her height but walking without a walker. All I caught was the back of a head of a short person entering the bathroom. I told my husband right away, and so he checked it out for me, but there wasn't anyone else in the house with us. After some more experiences, I started to smudge the house on a regular basis. We ended up splitting up for a while, and I moved back home in the summer of 2014. My husband had more intense, scary experiences while he was living there alone during our separation, but I'll save those stories for another time. We were playing manhunt, and we saw something swinging from the trees, like a dark brown black creature swinging. Never saw it again. Then years later, when I was in high school and working at a sub shop, my co-workers and I were the only ones on, and were talking about the time when he was walking through the woods with his friend and saw something swinging through the trees and described the same thing. These woods in question are connected too. I was in a different set of woods around the park and its old Native American grounds. A lot of my city is, but I was talking to 3 friends and was the only one facing a certain direction, when all of a sudden I see a fluorescent green person running, almost like a full reflector suit, but as it's got maybe a 20-yard radius, it disappears mid-stride. I've held on to this for years and just haven't been able to ever come up with an explanation for it. When I was 6, my mum and I took a trip to Mexico to visit my grandparents. They lived in a small adobe house that was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by mountains, rivers, and woods. It was beautiful, and I loved exploring the woods all day until the sun went down with my grandpa's 2 dogs. This particular day, the dogs and I would set out to explore as usual, but things were not about to go as they usually did. We set out at about 11 in the morning. We walked through the woods, occasionally ran into some stray chickens from nearby farms, collected sticks, stones, and whatever else I found interesting in that moment. And finally, I came upon this creek where I found a small dead turtle. I had gone deeper into the woods that day than any other day, so this creek was new to me. So I decided to stop there and let the dogs get a drink and cool off while I played in the water. Once they had rested for a little bit, and I was done playing, I decided to continue further in and explore some more since it was still early. So we crossed the creek, and this is where things got strange. We crossed the creek, and the next thing I knew, we were behind a group of trees. The creek was not behind us anymore, so we had obviously walked far enough for it to have gone out of sight. But how? We had just crossed it a few seconds ago. At least, that is all I remember. Well, as we were behind these trees, I noticed the dogs staring intensely at something beyond the trees. So I decided to take a look. What I saw, I cannot explain to this day. I saw a bunch of tiny little beings that looked like tiny people. They were just walking around and did not seem to notice us. They looked like they could fit into the palm of your hand. Their skin was the color of normal skin, and they appeared to be wearing greenish-brownish colored clothing, or what I assumed to be clothing. They did not have hair. I just stared at them and remained hidden behind the trees. Luckily, my grandpa's dogs were so well trained that they would not make a sound or attack anything unless you made a specific sound that they understood, as you give them in order to attack. After observing them for a while, I decided to turn around and start walking back. Suddenly, the next thing I knew, I was crossing the creek again, heading out of the woods. Again, like when I first crossed the creek to go into the woods, it was like my memory just stopped the moment I turned around to walk away and fast-forwarded to me crossing the creek to leave. I have no memory of which path I took to reach the spot to where those tiny beings were, or what path I took to get back to the creek to be able to go home. Even stranger is that the sun was beginning to set when I crossed the creek to get back out, but it was barely 11 in the morning when we'd gone into the woods. So I lost hours of time. This is all I remember from that day. I'm 25 now, and have never been able to remember the parts that got lost. About 10 years ago, my boyfriend and I were in bed sleeping. He jerked awake and started inching up towards the headboard, which woke me. He was making scared moans and was looking at the foot of our bed. I looked at where he was looking and saw a short man with frizzly hair and a pig snout and jowls staring at him. Not me, him. He started screaming to turn on the light, and I was reaching over to do that when it lunged at him and made a weird grunting noise. I turned the light on, and when I did, it vanished. We started talking about what we saw. I would say he had frizzy hair, and he said yes, a pig snout and jowls. Our descriptions matched perfectly. I felt this wave of absolute malevolence rolling off this creature and towards my boyfriend, not at me but at him. We tried to recreate it with lights and shadows but couldn't. We slept in the living room that night. We didn't leave the house. I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't know what else to think, and I still get goosebumps thinking or writing about it. I haven't told my current boyfriend because I don't want to scare him. I'm still in the building, and I haven't felt that evil thing since my ex-boyfriend moved out. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe and press that bell icon to be notified every single time I post. You should have learnt the schedule by now, but it doesn't hurt, does it? If you enjoyed tonight's video, be sure to let me know. I have just today updated the Patreon and members board, the one that you can see now, so a huge thank you to all my members and patrons. Yeah, you guys really are amazing. It really means a lot to me, so thank you so much for your contributions. It really does help keep the channel ticking over. Got good news about the app. We're almost ready to do a full launch, I think soon, shortly. Got some surprises in store for you guys too. Stuff about you getting involved with the app. So yeah, all exciting stuff coming your way. I'm quite tired, so I'm probably just going to end the outro here. There are more videos for you to watch if you're not done. Links on screen now. But until then, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.